how will Alberta pay for its healthcare? It's like, well, we already pay for our healthcare and your health. Yeah. Ultimately, where the conversation needs to get to is just the math. We're just going to save so much money if we stop paying for all the pylons in Montreal.
There is no way that you can politically change the system in order to eradicate socialism, because the root cause of it is fiat. How do you change the system? You exit the fiat system and you build a new system, which is the Bitcoin system. And I'm seeing the kind of same realization that the Bitcoiners have with Alberta, which is we tried everything within the Federation of Canada to change the system from within, but the system is rigged against us. So maybe we should just exit and build a new one.
We've got Francis here, an adopted Albertan in spirit. I don't know if everybody knows this, but during COVID, Francis was more or less run out of the city of Montreal, moved to the slightly more sane city of Calgary and are slower to implement restrictions, and then eventually fled when those restrictions here became tyrannical as well. So that said, Bull Bitcoin is headquartered here in Alberta because it's a much more business-friendly province and was the natural home for Bull Bitcoin. And so that's why, I felt it was appropriate to get Francis up here talking about Alberta independence, even though he lives in the jungle and is more independent than most people at the personal sovereign level. So I wanted to start with just what is it about Alberta that brought you here, that made you want to bring the company and live here?
Well, first of all, it was you, right? So Dave was my Alberta friend. I didn't know anybody in Alberta. I didn't know anything about Alberta. And I came for the first time in 2018. And there was a spirit in Alberta that was very appealing to me. The Western side of it, the individual liberty. I met Madex here in Alberta, and he took me to shoot guns in the mountains for the first time. And I was like, this is fucking great. You guys go out in the mountains and shoot guns here. I thought this was only in the States. And, we have been living under a tyrannical socialist government in Canada for 50 years, arguably a little more. And the entire country of Canada has followed with this agenda almost blindly. And there's only one place in Canada that is acting as a last bastion of freedom, and that's Alberta. There's also practical reasons with there's this intellectual idea of Alberta, which is freedom, business. We can just go dig out the oil from the earth. We can just go mine stuff. We can just go build industries here. And there's also a culture also here that respects entrepreneurs. In Quebec, if you're an entrepreneur, there must be something wrong with you. You must be exploiting someone, or you should donate all your money to all these causes, because capitalism and entrepreneurship is not respected in Quebec. It's almost it's tolerated. You're allowed to be a capitalist in Quebec, but you're respected if you're a famous TV host, or if you work for the government, or if you're on the CBC, or if you're an artist. But if you're an entrepreneur, you're not respected. And here in Alberta, we venerate and we respect people who build stuff. So there's this intellectual aspect of Alberta, of the culture here, which I really like. There's also practical reasons. I mean, the taxes are lower. The banks are way more friendly. It's way easier to do business. So we moved the head office. So Bull Bitcoin was born in Montreal, and we moved the head office here, and very, very happy with that move. And interestingly enough, when I first came here for the first time, and I met you and Madex, and I met Ben, and I met all these. I knew Ben from before, but when I started to hang out with the Alberta crowd, even back then, the idea of Alberta independence was already being talked about. We were talking about it. I still have these old Twitter posts and Facebook posts where I'm telling my friends in Quebec, I'm like, guys, there's actually a solid, undercurrent of frustration and desire for independence from Ottawa and Alberta. And I thought that was really cool. It's very different from independence movement in Quebec. In Quebec, we have an independence and freedom movement, which is not capitalist at all. It's not based on political ideology. It's not based on free markets. It's not based on, getting screwed over by Ottawa, because of course Quebec is not screwed over by Ottawa. Quebec is being showered with money by Ottawa for us to stay there. the kind of like independence movement in Quebec is a lot more like ethnic and language based and nationalist. Whereas here in Alberta, what I saw was like, when you're getting screwed over by a tyrant, there's only two ways that you can tackle it. You can either try to change the system from the inside, or you can exit the system and build a new one. And I think that's one of the things, and I'm diverting from your question, Dave, I'm on a rant here, but like, that's one of the things that I think, why is there such an overlap between the hardcore Bitcoiners and the free Alberta movement? And I think it's because we're both approaching two issues from the same perspective. The Bitcoiners have seen that the system is fundamentally rigged with fiat. The root cause of a lot of the problems is easy money, printing money, and there is no way that you can politically change the system in order to eradicate socialism. So, because the root cause of it is fiat. So, how do you change the system? Is you exit the fiat system and you build a new system, which is the Bitcoin system. And I'm seeing the kind of like same realization that the Bitcoiners have with Alberta, which is we tried everything within the Federation of Canada to change the system from within. We are debating, we're talking, we're making speeches, we are hosting radio shows, and we're trying to change the system, but the system is rigged against us. It's a parasitic system that takes away the wealth from the producers and gives it to the moochers. And people in Alberta are starting to realize, I think, that we're never going to be able to fix this broken system because it's rigged against producers. And it just so happens that Alberta is the territory which has a lot of producers. So Albertans are starting to realize maybe we can't fix Canada. The Bitcoiners have realized maybe we can't fix the monetary system. So maybe we should just exit and build a new one. And I'm really excited about this two communities, the Bitcoiners and the Alberta freedom lovers, are coming together because we have so many points in common. And the point being, if you can't fix the system, then you need to leave it. And I think that's what brings a lot of us here. I am a Quebecer ethnically, linguistically, culturally, but I secretly wish that the culture of Quebec, like the political culture, was closer to the one in Alberta. I think it's really sad that Quebec has become so socialist and so collectivist. And Alberta is the only place in Canada that I really feel intellectually connected. So I'm really glad to be here. And yeah.
Awesome. That was a great answer. You got like many of my future questions in there.
I knew. I know it.
But it's interesting that you point out the cultural thing, right? Because we were all in Montreal for the Canadian Bitcoin conference last year, and Madex and I had this experience trying to go to a Mexican restaurant multiple times, and being just like rejected with the worst service of all time. And I feel like there's this thing that's crept into a lot of the liberal cities, but is really particularly bad in Montreal, where it's like, it would be capitalist to give you good service, and so they won't do it. And there's almost like this aversion to just like anything that is capitalist. And that runs right into the whole thing with the pipelines, really, that comes back to the root of the dispute fundamentally, right? Is, there's this big cultural divide, which is why Quebec wanted to separate in the first place, and that makes a lot of sense. And there's a really easy to paint a picture of like this unique culture that should be a separate nation. But at the end of the day, the math didn't add up because Quebec was just getting so much money from Canada, and it was just like very economically advantageous for Quebec to stay within Canada. And I think the thing that is going to start shifting, and I hope this will shift because I think it'll need to shift this narrative, is that this is an entirely different fight. This is an entirely different conversation because, A, we do have a distinct culture, and that, we saw the Premier of Quebec sort of making fun of us for saying like, oil and gas is not a culture. And it's like, so first of all, it is a culture. And second of all, there's a lot more to Alberta culture than just oil and gas. We do have a very distinct and unique Western culture here that values independence, personal freedom, personal responsibility. And all those things, I think, line up with Bitcoiners way more than, the Quebecois culture, even though that one, I think, is more distinct. And ultimately, where the conversation needs to get to is just the math, right? Because we're just going to save so much money if we stop paying for all the pylons in Montreal, right? It's
Yeah.
and there's a lot of pylons in Montreal, if you guys have ever been there. And, they need those pylons, I'm sure. But we would rather have the $20 or so billion a year that we're sending out there. And, we get these ridiculous questions. All these people from Toronto coming at you on Twitter that are saying things like, how will Alberta pay for its healthcare? It's like, well, we already pay for our healthcare and your healthcare.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
how about we just cut out paying for the healthcare of Quebec and the Maritimes, and we'll be in a much more economically advantageous spot. And I did very unscientific, but I probably spent like an hour on it, so not casual, study of ChatGPT, wherein I said, if we took all the services the federal government of Canada provides to Albertans, and we just provided the same services at the same cost, which is, I think that's a super low bar, because those services are terrible and they're probably exceptionally expensive for what we get out of them. But even if we just go with their same very low bar, if we were to replace those services provided by the federal government with the same services provided through tax revenue from the provincial government, and removed all transfer payments and all of the subsidies that we provide to the rest of the country, the average Albertan would save $17,000 to $25,000 a year. And I'm pretty sure everybody could use an extra $17,000 to $25,000 a year.
And it's not just about the horrendous spending that's happening at the Ottawa level. It's also about the regulations that are being applied nationally, which disproportionately disfavor Alberta, most notably environmental regulations. So, one of the things that really bothers me with kind of like my friends group in Quebec, which is, the Gen, the millennials, where we like to impose all sorts of environmental regulations, but yet we still drive cars, So being part of Canada, Alberta gets all of these environmental regulations. There's criminal law, there's gun laws, there's immigration rules, and there's obviously also the inflation and the money printing. So it's not just about getting taxed and having to send the equalization payments. It's all of the regulations and systems. I don't know a lot about Alberta farming, but a big one is supply management, right? So supply management is designed specifically for the Quebec agricultural industry. The idea that government sets quotas and prices for goods such as wheat, such as milk, that is straight out of the Soviet playbook. And I don't really think that matches very well. There was really recently a case where a guy was producing too many chickens or too many eggs or something, and they raided his farms because he was producing eggs over quota and selling them out of the quota system. I don't think that's really in tune with the Alberta culture. Alberta's getting absolutely fucked, and it's really, really sad as a Quebecer to see that we are kind of almost. It's not just Quebec, There's also Ontario, and there's also Toronto, and there's also the eastern provinces. But that's kind of a source of shame for me as a capitalist Quebecer to see how much our province is hampering the progress of Alberta. And you and I are fans of what we call the sovereign individual thesis, the information age era, where basically I think what we're going to see is jurisdictions competing with each other to attract capital, to attract taxpayers, to attract talent. And Alberta is not able to compete, right? Alberta is not able to compete with international jurisdictions in order to attract capital and human resources because it can't. It doesn't have the authority to do so. It doesn't have the authority to make its own rules. So the way that I see things evolving is, and we talk about this a lot, is we're going to see over time smaller states emerge. The big, Canada is an artificial state. It doesn't really make sense from a historical perspective. I think Canada's days are gone, and I think one of the things that I foresee in the future is Canada's going to break up in smaller pieces, and Canada might be the first domino to fall. A lot of countries should break up in smaller pieces. Italy is a great example. Italy has a massive very, very strong autonomous separatist movement. It has a similar problem. The north of Italy subsidizes the entire rest of Italy, and historically, those countries were not the same country. They had never been the same country until the late 19th century. Savoy was never part of France until the late 19th century. France as a country did not exist in its current form until Napoleon. Same thing with the UK. We were just talking about that. The UK is a fully made-up country of 4 distinct nations. If you look at a map of Germany 150 years ago, you had literally 40 states that were making up Germany, and they were all centralized and consolidated in this kind of like modern nation-state system. And I think that's just not working for people anymore. And I think that Bitcoin might be a catalyst for that, because since states can't control capital anymore, capital is now free. With Bitcoin, you can move capital, you can leave with your money, right? No matter if your country has capital control and prevents people from leaving with their money, they'll do so by censoring bank transactions and by physically preventing you from leaving with cash, which we're seeing is now a thing. But Bitcoin breaks that whole system where you can literally get up and leave and move your entire business and your entire life with your capital, with 12 words in your head, with a seed plate in your backpack, with a little device. So because states can't restrict capital anymore, capital is going to flow, and people are going to go where they treat it best. And I'm the best example of that. So first, I left the fiat world because Bitcoin treated me best, and then I left Quebec and I went to Alberta because Alberta treated me best, and then I left Canada altogether. I moved to Costa Rica because Costa Rica treated me best. And hopefully with Bitcoin, Alberta is going to be able to compete on the global stage. But in order for that to happen, it needs to be free and be released from the burdens of Ottawa.
Yeah, I think we're uniquely positioned to compete on that level. And we should be experiencing like a reverse brain drain ultimately. And I saw a really good response actually after the election. We're basically in this situation where we're in taxation without representation, right? Like the election was over before our polls had closed yet again. And very obviously the election ended in a way that does not represent the interests of Alberta. And really the incentives are just not aligned at this point, right? Like the incentive should be that Quebec, who's receiving so much money from Alberta, should be incentivized to want Alberta to make more money. Because the way the math works, we would end up paying more money to Quebec if we had pipelines running to Quebec and we had our resources unlocked. But we're in this situation with this really just European-centric more than Canadian-centric government who is representing the interests of Davos, the WEF, the City of London, the elites of the world who are trying to scare us with this climate hoax and really using that as just like a really weak crutch at this point to continue to crack down upon us. But in a world where Alberta is free, not only will the individuals save so much money in the short term just by paying less money to Ottawa to redistribute to the rest of the provinces, but if we can unlock the resource potential and the economic potential in a free market society, we will be a jurisdiction that can very, very quickly compete for all of the smartest people in the world. This should be a place where if you are someone with entrepreneurial tendencies, if you're someone like Francis who has the option to live anywhere in the world, we should be attracting all of those people. We should have the greatest brain gain really in the history of the world going on here. And that is something that I believe that we're at the precipice of, is we can unlock all of that potential and bring all of those people here. And ultimately, Alberta should be one of the richest jurisdictions in the world. If anyone in the room hasn't read The Sovereign Individual that Francis mentioned, I'd say that's like a really must read. And one of the core things that it talks about is, like Francis said, this eventual breakup from the world that we're in now, where the large-scale nation-state has made a lot of sense as a way to organize a society for really the last 100 to 300 years. It's been sort of trending in that direction. And now Bitcoin has permanently removed the ability of the state to tax us through inflation in the long term. And what that does is limits the ability of the state to continue to concentrate their ability to inflict violence and control the population. And we in Alberta, I think, are lucky because we have this entrepreneurial sentiment. We have this independent mindset, whether that means independent as an individual or independent as a province. And we are positioned to be one of the first breakaways that leads to that dissolution across the world. You know, Alberta leaves Canada. Quebec is still going to want to get paid. You know, they need those pylons in Montreal. Ontario is not going to want to pay. I've been following a really awesome account on Instagram that's Newfoundland independence movement. You know, there's a lot of people actually living in Newfoundland who were born in Newfoundland when it was an independent nation, before it joined Canada. And I think we are the linchpin that is going to kick off this entire thing. And really, Bitcoiners make the most sense as the tip of this spear because, you know, we've already seen the light on wanting to get ourselves out of that fiat system and wanting to move away from the damage that is done to the individual when the government prints money and devalues our currency. The next step now is we can not only move away from the direct impact of the inflation, we can move away from all of the damage they do when they spend the money that they print. You know, they're just like it's getting worse, right? Like they're trying to crack down on our speech. They're trying to crack down on really every angle that they can, and they're not going to stop. They're not going to slow down. And yeah, I'm glad everyone's here. I'm glad to feel what I've felt since that election, which is that the Overton window has shifted, and Albertans are a lot more ready than they used to be. Like, I started talking very seriously about independence in 2019 when Trudeau was reelected, and almost everybody that I knew, especially like the old rich white guys, were like, that'd be nice, but it'll never happen. But the window has shifted, and it's not just the people who are crazy enough to come out to a room like this. It's the normies in our lives have honestly fucking had enough, basically, at this point. And I think we're ready to move. So,
if Alberta leaves, I think Quebec will leave. If Quebec leaves, Alberta will stay, because you know, and the problem goes away. But if Alberta leaves, Quebec will leave. I'm almost certain of that. And actually, what's really interesting about Quebec is that we had a downward trend in the independence movement, but it has completely shifted amongst the young people for different reasons. In Alberta, I think it's more about ideology, and economics. So freedom of speech, freedom of business, and freedom to exploit natural resources. In Quebec, it's a reaction against the globalist wokeism of Ottawa. Quebec is still socialist. The young people are still kind of socialist, but what they don't like is the globalist wokeism of Ottawa. So if Alberta leaves, Quebec leaves, and if that happens, then the idea of, okay, because if you look at the last 30 years, world borders have pretty much not changed. You know, you had, of course, the breakup of of Yugoslavia, and you had like a few very minor things happening in Yugoslavia and in Africa, but for all intents and purposes, like world borders have like never changed over 30 years, which is very rare in the history of humanity. You know, borders always change. And this idea that, okay, like the game is over, we have these globalist mega nation states, and that's, you know, Canada is going to be Canada for the next 250 years. If Alberta leaves and Quebec leaves, then that opens the door to Northern Italy, it opens the door to Scotland, it opens the door to the Basque Country, you know, but it also opens the door to other jurisdictions, you know, city-states or cities that are going to want to move out there's a similar situation between Alberta and Canada. There's similar situations all over the world. And that's going to open up a lot of opportunities for sovereign individuals, because if these regions start to break away, then we have a lot of bargaining power as individuals, because we can say, hey, we will go here, we will go there, depending on how we treat you. What's most important is that states start to compete with each other for our money and for our business, because right now we're like captives, right? So really, really exciting times ahead. And of course, I think the last election that we had, I think we put a lot of faith in the Conservatives as Albertans, or even me as a libertarian conservative. I put a lot of faith in the Conservatives, and you were thinking, okay, like, Pouliot's going to win, and he's going to turn it around. And we all saw his speeches at the Parliament where he was going to crack down on spending, and he was going to crack down on central bank inflation, and he was going to break the whole. So he had a narrative, a communications line, which was relatively aligned with what Albertans want in a like this. Pouliot was representing a lot of the ideas of Alberta, and despite. How long was it? How long was Trudeau in power again? Like
9 years?
No, more than 9 years. More than 9 years.
No. Was it 10 years?
10 years. Despite 10 years of the largest economic decline of a Western country, probably since Argentina, where the productivity per capita and the GDP per capita completely diverged from. I don't know if you guys have seen this chart where you have GDP per capita of the United States and productivity per capita of the United States and Canada. They've been aligned pretty much forever. Despite what you might say about, Trudeau Sr. and all that, like Canada was like doing relatively well. It was relatively aligned to the US economy. And you have this insanely sharp divergence, which starts like literally in 2015. It's unbelievable, or 2016. And despite the COVID measures, the crackdown on resources, the mass immigration, the inflation, it's pretty much the worst performing government that I can't really think of another worse performing government ever. Like, the UK is bad, France is bad, Germany is bad, fine. Yeah, but like none of them are as bad as Canada, right? And despite all of that, he still got reelected. And I think that was a huge black pill for a lot of Albertans where I say, well, I think that was like the last election, that really mattered. If Carney wins now, and Carney is not, it's not like a more serious or mature version of Trudeau. Carney is really the master of puppets behind the globalist agenda. If you think Trudeau was bad, and if you don't know who Mark Carney is, a lot of people don't know who Mark Carney is. Mark Carney is chairman of boards at the IMF. Mark Carney has the distinction of being the only person in the world ever to be the head of two different central banks, destroyed the English economy with the Central Bank of England, obviously did a terrible job with the Central Bank of Canada. And not only that, he was chairman of the Bank of International Settlement. So if you want to go down a rabbit hole, learn about the Bank of International Settlement, an organization that very few people know about. All you have to do is Google Bank of International Settlement Office. It's this gigantic dark tower of Mordor in the town of Basel, which just... By the way, also interesting story. That, by the way, is not part of Switzerland. It's a separate territory within the canton, the city of Basel. So the Swiss police cannot enter this building. It just literally, sorry to say, be crude, but it just looks where children are being trafficked inside. Honestly, it looks so evil. Anyway, the Bank of International Settlement did very, very bad things, especially during the Second World War, where they basically were responsible for melting all of the Jews' gold and creating currency out of it. It's the central bank of central banks. It is the institution that sets the interest rates all over the world. It's the institution that sets all the clearing and settlement between all the central banks. So all the central banks heads meet basically once a month in that organization and dictate how the world is going to run. And obviously, Mark Carney was the chairman of that institution for a number of years. He's chairman of the United Nations Committee on Climate Change. He was chairman of the WEF organization committee. Like any sketchy international globalist organization that you can think of, he was at the head of, or he was very high up for a number of years. Whereas Trudeau is basically like a drunken fool that was looking for attention and wants to be loved because obviously wasn't loved enough as a kid, so he wants to be loved by the people. So he's a fool, right? He's an incompetent fool, whereas Mark Carney is a very, very competent man. And you know that he's competent because he's been at the head of all these, but competent for doing horrible things. And I had been tweeting about Mark Carney almost in an obsessive way for like 10 years, saying like, this is the most dangerous person alive. He really is the master of puppets, the intellectual godfather. He's the intellectual godfather, by the way, of the ESG movement, right? He, not single-handedly, but he is the intellectual fountainhead of this movement. And now this guy is running Canada. So we went from stupid goofball to globalist master of puppets, which has an agenda specifically outlined in his book to make central banks rule the world and to eliminate fossil fuels and to lead us into this post-nationalist, globalist, social crony capitalist democratic utopia. And he's head of our country now. So it really can't get much worse. And so we elected this guy after 10 years of globalism. How is that possible?
It's not compatible with Alberta.
That's the silver lining, right? Is like we were all kind of like hopeful that Pierre could get in there because he could probably improve our lives
Marginally.
fairly quickly, if only so much. But the silver lining with Carney getting in there is that he's like so obviously part of the evil empire. When they say them, Carney is them.
Yeah.
And he's really, like Manik said, he's completely incompatible with Alberta and Albertan values.
Yeah.
And the nice thing is he's, I hope, going to push us right out of the country. And the change that I've seen, like the energy is way better than anybody thinks. Like the normies have had enough, and that's at least enough of them have had enough, because it's so obvious that we're being screwed. And really, I think what we need now at this point, we're going to nominate Ben. If Ben doesn't get his YouTube channel back, he's going to have to be the leader of the Alberta independence movement. But that's the next step. Is we need leadership, we need a plan, and we need a narrative that can show Albertans just how big of a scam it is. But yeah, let's do questions.
So other than being just a country, what are the possibilities for Alberta, a principality, townships,
Kingdom.
yeah?
Yeah. Well,
What are the options, and what do you think is the most realistic based on?
It's really hard to say what the structure might end up like.
We could restructure
Yeah.
Canada.
So right now we are living under, depending on how you measure it, like 4 or 5 levels of government, and it would be really good to go down to 2, right? So we could go down to a point where we have what is now our provincial government becomes the national government, and then our municipal governments still exist. And well, we don't need the crown. We don't need a king. We don't need the City of London. We don't need the globalist overarching agenda. If it was up to me, Alberta would not be a member of the UN. We would not seek recognition from the United Nations. All of that is irrelevant, and I think that's where the sentiment is going, that people want our attention focused here. They want to spend the resources that we generate in the province of Alberta and the productivity that we generate. We want to spend it here. And anything that we do beyond that is something that we can figure out at a later date. Personally, I'm not a big fan of democracy in general. I think that, if you ask the large group of less useful people if they should have some of the stuff of the smaller group of more useful people, they'll always say yes, right? And it leads to a form of communism. It's just resource redistribution. So I hope ultimately we end up in a scenario where we have some kind of a less democratic system that leads to more personal freedoms, honestly. But I don't really care what everything's called. I think it'd be great if we had like a kick-ass duke instead of a premier.
I mean, if you gave me a magic wand, I can fix Canada. I can fix her. I know how to fix Canada. You eliminate all transfers to Ottawa. You have a system which is very close to what Switzerland has, which is basically all the provinces manage pretty much all of their government services, except for something like the army, right? Like defense. And then you have something that's closer to the European Union or closer to Switzerland, where you have this this government, a federal government, which basically only runs the army and does arbitrage between the different provinces if there's commercial differences that appear, but no equalization. If you have no equalization and no transfer at all, and there's no more health ministry in Ottawa, there's no more education ministry. Ottawa basically does nothing. Then you have all the provinces that compete with each other in a very decentralized. It's a new constitution, right? And then we could have an American-style constitution which guarantees to all Canadians sets of rights across all provinces, like property rights, the right to bear arms, and that kind of stuff. And you can have like a federal Supreme Court, so something that's like closer to Switzerland. But obviously, you need to have all the provinces to agree to this constitutional change, and obviously they won't want to, because only Alberta wants that, because all the other provinces are perfectly happy with this socialist centralized system, which allows them to steal the resources from the rich and the richer provinces and give it to the moochers. So you can fix Canada by going back to the original goal of Canada, which is to have this loosely decentralized confederation of political entities that share, we're going to share an army, and we're going to share a common market, and maybe we're going to share a currency. These were not bad ideas at the time, but there's just no incentive to do that. So Alberta can't fix, nobody can fix Canada. Like at this point, nobody can fix Canada. Like the core of Canada is fully rotten, and all it can do is collapse.
Yeah. So the thing I got to add to that, there's this concept called the Westphalian model of a nation. The Westphalian peace was founded on this idea that in order to be a nation state, a country would need two things. They need control over their currency and control over their army. And we've now entered a time where if we look to the long term, that's permanently not possible. Because of the fact that Bitcoin exists, the ability of governments in the long term to be able to print money to pay for this standing army that they need to maintain this structural territorial integrity is permanently ended.
Yeah.
And so this idea that we can hold this together with the overarching idea of whatever Canada is being, this is what funds the military, this is what brings us all together as a nation. I think that's ended. I think that time is over, and this is back to the book, The Sovereign Individual. The core principle of that book is that the nation state is ending, and part of the reason that the nation state, or the large-scale nation state, is ending is because the logic on violence is shifting. And now, for the last 50 years, it's been much cheaper to defend against violence.
The economies of scale of the military are going down. Like, if you think about how are you able to get 10,000 tanks? I mean, the only way to do that is to have this massive giga centralized state. But what we're seeing now, and I know we've been looking at these trends with a lot of eagerness and a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of awe, is that these European-made tanks in Ukraine are being obliterated with drones that cost today like $1,000 more or less, like $1,500. So you have like a $10 million Abrams tank being obliterated by a drone that's $1,500. The cost of these drones is going down tremendously. Even just yesterday, China released their new swarm-based. I don't know if you saw that.
No.
So swarm-based spy drones, which are about this size, which can be armed with a very tiny lethal explosive. How much do these cost? Like almost nothing. So the state, the Westphalian model, the state has two roles: have a fucking badass army and have a strong currency. Currency, I think if we're here, we all agree that states cannot, in the presence of Bitcoin, there is no state that can provide a strong, lasting currency. So that role of the Westphalian state model is completely gone. Now, when you go to the level of the army, I mean, what if you look at the ingenuity of both Ukrainian and Russian fighters, both of fighters all over the world, and how they are managing to sabotage and disrupt, like what Ukraine did by, with these drones, like destroying like a fourth of the Russian Air Force with these homemade, drones. And likewise, the Russians are destroying these European tanks with Toyotas with these $1,000 drone launchers on the back of the Toyota pickup truck. How can a country like Canada like hope to compete against it? I think like we are 15, 20 years away from massive military, large scale military from being obsoleted on the battlefield. And you're actually seeing that in the United States, by the way. Like the hottest companies in the US are these autonomous defense companies like Anduril. You're seeing all these technologies pop up. So if the economies of scale of the military are no longer an advantage of the state and they can't guarantee the money, what is the role of the state now? Okay, it's really just the welfare state. Like that's like the only role that the government is doing that people like. But the welfare state only works. You eventually run out of other people's money also.
Yeah.
Right. So are we at the point where we're running out of people's money? Well, we're pretty damn close. Like the Ponzi is pretty because now
we're the other people.
I mean, we're running out of other people, so we're importing it. So right now we're like, we need to import other people because we're running out of other people's money, so we need to have other people coming in. So it's not a surprise that Canada has like the highest immigration rate on earth. It's like, we need more people to come in to take their fucking money, and then we need them to have kids also so that we can take debt that's backed by the future tax revenue that they're going to bring. And then, but a thing is also there's also a cultural shift at the Gen Z level, where I think the older generation, like the boomers and like the Mark Carney types of this world, they're like, well, we're just gonna indebt our children, and they will just fucking pay, and they will work until they are 75. But I think the Gen Zs today. Maybe like the early Gen Zs are like little brainwashed, but if you look at like the younger Gen Zs, like I'm seeing a shift where people are like, fuck you, I'm not gonna fucking pay. Like, I'm not gonna fucking work until I'm like 80 because the retirement is a Ponzi scheme. Like, I'm just gonna buy Bitcoin and I'm gonna work on the internet and I'm gonna become an entrepreneur and I'm gonna start to vibe code and I'm gonna start to do businesses outside of the traditional system. So I think we haven't run out of other people's money because, other people have been giving the money. Thank you, Alberta, for giving your money. Yeah. Thank you all to the workers for paying your taxes. But I think gradually people are starting to say, hey, actually, you know what? Like, I'm gonna stop giving my money to other people. And then what they're doing is they're opting into Bitcoin, they are leaving the country, or they're entering the black market.
Taking the whole province with us, leaving the country.
Yeah.
So ultimately, at the end of the day, there's only really two things that the federal government provides. They provide the mechanism for the redistribution of wealth, which is very disadvantageous to Albertans. And then they provide this like broader sort of safety picture where they've essentially been like, don't you think this one thing's scary and we can protect you from it? And the answer at this point is just no, we don't need them to protect us. So.
Sorry, can you guys just comment on like the concept of like network states as a mechanism for actual functional separation, whether you see there's any merit in the concept of network states or not?
You mean kind of like private little city states all across the world, that kind of stuff?
Boston's concept of like people pooling together money online, like online communities are like can now coordinate capital online and then can become physical political entities.
I mean,
I'm just curious about like if you're not familiar with like just the
I am
Bitcoin and Alberta and politics, and so I was just curious about like what are some ideas of functionally how?
Yeah, of course.
Not all the normies, but like, is there a different way to coordinate online? How do you guys think about like the specifics of it?
Well,
and again, like open.
Yeah, human society has evolved with network states forever. It used to be called the church, It used to be called medieval guilds, merchant associations. It used to be called insurance. So you've had groups of people all over the world that pooled knowledge, resources, and energy together that were tied, either like the Freemasons, for example, and like all sorts of organizations that were serving like a very similar function to the state, which is mutual protection, insurance, and that's pretty much it. You know, that's the functions of government. It's like mutual protection and insurance. So with Bitcoin, we can achieve a lot of that. With decentralized technologies and the internet, we can achieve a lot of that. And to a large degree, like the network of Bitcoin people all across the world and Bitcoin companies already act, you know, kind of like as a network. It's not very formalized, but you know, there's these places popping up. There is one thing though that these network states don't provide is like physical security in the location that you're in, and it's like there is always a place where you need to physically live. So even though we can have an existence for our money, for example, for money, we can exist fully in a network state when it comes to money and when it comes to insurance and, you know, contract enforcement and all that kind of stuff. Like for commercial contract, we can do all of that online and in a virtual way, but you still need to physically live somewhere in a community where you live. So I kind of foresee a mix of both, right? Where physical hubs, physical locations, physical territories provide some services. The services that I think states will provide in the future are going to be what is described as the night watchman state model, which is specifically also called minarchism. So you need to have local police. I don't think private police is ever going to really take off. I think we're going to still have some kind of like local police. We're going to have a local judge to handle disputes between neighbors. And then we'll have like a minimalist kind of state, which guarantees that you can live in a community physically, peacefully. And that if there is disorder, if there is an invasion, whether that's an army or that's a group of people that move in and stir shit up, you can have police and judges to sort all of that out. But for anything that's related to business law, to contracts, to finance, I think all of that can be handled fully digitally, and obviously to monetary policy. So I think like a mix of both is probably what we're gonna see. Yeah.
And so
I'm not like a phone anarcho-capitalist. Like I still think we need some form of government to make sure that we're not killing each other. And I know some more hardcore cypherpunk anarcho-capitalist Bitcoiners think that anything that the government provides, the free market can do better, including police, including courts. But on a practical basis, I still think it's nice to have like a physical local government to handle law and order.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, like I mentioned, the two functions of the state, the resource reallocation, I think that the network state is going to handle that, but it's going to be optional, right? And so the idea that philanthropy is going to fund and lift up the poor is something that a lot of people can get behind. That's why socialism is so appealing to people, right? But when you add that involuntary element to the resource confiscation before reallocating it, that's when it becomes an unethical theft, right? And so we will still have voluntary network states. We'll have rooms like this where people get together and they decide to solve a problem by pooling their resources in a voluntary way and putting them towards that. And so that I think that's where the network state's going to shine. Like Francis said, there's like a physical security need, and I think Alberta really drives that home because, you know, we're talking about all this wealth that is now being redistributed without our consent. That wealth is physically coming out of the ground, right? Like you can't just move to Costa Rica and be in the oil industry in Alberta. You need to physically control the ground that you're on, right? And so I think we will have in Alberta a very strong government that, you know, offers the protection of physical safety and property rights for the people who physically live here. And so that's the direction that I hope we're going with that. We're going to take one more question. We got John over there.
Thank you. Francis, you mentioned Quebec will leave after Alberta. I'm going to make the argument that Quebec's already left
It'd be nice, but we're still paying.
Yeah, no, I think Quebec's done it in a very sly way. But if you look at this, like legally, right, how Quebec is set up, you've got Revenue Quebec,
Yeah.
Cité de Quebec, he's got the civil code. So Quebec kind of runs like an independent state already. My concern for Alberta is Alberta doesn't have this framework in place.
Yeah.
So I guess moving forward, if let's say there's a majority of Albertans that do want to separate, one, how do you get this legal framework in place? But also a lot of the lands in Alberta, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is a lot of the natives still control those lands. And Francis, I mean, right, like a couple of years ago in Oka, what happened, like you piss off some of the natives on their land that they're ready to go, they're ready to defend, they're ready to fight. How would Alberta deal with those kinds of challenges?
Yeah. So it's pretty straightforward. So the couple things that we need our own revenue agency, we need our own police force, and those are things that are already underway, that are already happening regardless of the independence movement. And it's not strange for us to ask for those things. Like you say, Quebec already has all those things.
Yeah.
We should all have all those things. We should have our own pension plan, which drastically changes the math on the rest of the pension plan. But I mean, that's one of the things that I keep hearing on Twitter is like, how will Alberta survive? Who's going to issue your passports? It's like, I'm pretty sure we got a printer. Like we can figure it out, guys. And the native lands thing is a bit of a red herring. The native land in Alberta is a little bit less than 2% of the total land. They can be a loud voice for sure.
It's only 2%?
Yeah, a little bit less than 2%. But at the end of the day, the current system for native lands is beyond corrupt, right? It's obviously a cash grab for the people who control those bands, who control those lands. And those people are really, we've seen some chiefs standing up and saying, you're not allowed to do this. So first of all, like the treaties are with Canada, they're not with Alberta. So whether or not we need to honor those treaties is a whole other thing. But realistically, what I think ends up happening, these people just want bribes, right? They're being bribed to be part of the current system. And if we suddenly had an extra $20 billion a year that we were not sending for the province of Quebec to pay their natives with bribes, we could very easily pay much larger bribes, and those people would just be on board, honestly.
Yeah, but and John, I think your point is very correct that if Quebec was to separate tomorrow, we would be up and running from day one. That people underestimate the amount of work that Quebec has done behind the scenes and like the nationalists in order to make that possible. Like it's a lot of institutions that are set up. The three that you named, we have La Sûreté du Québec, we have immigration, we have Revenu Québec, but we also have, by the way, we have like Quebec consulates. There's literally Quebec consulates. Quebec has a unofficial consulate in Paris and in a few other countries. In London. Quebec has like its own international diplomatic corps. There's like a lot of work that went behind that. So, looking at what, for example, like Daniel Smith is doing, I think she actually has not a bad strategy, right? So there, first of all, Alberta Police Force, I think it's something that is actively in the works and probably going to. I don't think there's going to be a lot of opposition to that. The revenue part is very, very critical because in Quebec, it's Le Revenu Québec that gets the taxes and remits to Ottawa. Whereas in Alberta, Ottawa collects the revenue and sends it back to Alberta. So Alberta has no leverage against Ottawa, whereas Revenu Québec does. And Revenu Québec is actually a very powerful institution. I don't know how many employees they have, but it's like in the tens of thousands. And, nobody ever has an issue with Revenu Canada when you're in Quebec. It's always Revenu Québec.
It's way more intense.
It's way, way more
It's
intense.
much worse.
And actually, a thing that very few people know, Quebec is the only province that has its own immigration ministry. So Quebec has a say into what kind of immigrants it gets, which I think, that would be very nice for every province to be able to decide where the immigrants are coming from in my province and how many each year are coming. And Quebec is able to push back against Ottawa on that specific part. So getting those things pre-separation, if separation is to happen, is obviously good. Like if you were to design Alberta separation, just intellectually, you would say, let's get all these institutions over the course of 10 years so that when we separate, we're ready to go. But also, that's not how history works, and states break up from, the Soviet Union dissolved right away, and somehow people are like, well, we need to build some shit, so let's fucking, get all this stuff in order. It's not a prerequisite to be ready. It's kind of like having a kid. You're never ready to have a kid. It just happens, and like once it happens, you get your shit together and you get going. So it's not going to be as easy for Alberta to get going from day one. But like the difference from Alberta and Quebec is that economically the benefits literally start from the first 2 years.
And
right?
here's a crazy idea. So if we stay a part of Canada, we obviously need our own revenue agency to sort of exert our sovereignty, be able to push back on the transfer payments, that kind of thing. But if we separate, do we need a revenue agency?
I mean, that would be interesting to see, to be like, well, we haven't had time to set up a revenue agency, so maybe we just won't tax you. Won't tax anyone.
Well, realistically, I think if we go from the premise that that Albertans collectively own the oil, we honestly don't need a revenue agency. We don't need corporate or personal taxes. If we just open the markets, take a royalty on the oil that we sell, that would more than pay for all of the expenditures of the entire province. If we just cut out the $20 billion that we have to send to Quebec, so
yeah,
I don't really think
I don't think that it's a huge problem. And as Dave says, like it's really hard to set up a government from scratch really quickly. So what if we just don't?
Yeah.
And realistically, no one's going to invade Alberta. Alberta doesn't need, no one needs a military anymore. Like the Canadian military is a joke. Everybody knows that the only military that counts in North America is the U.S. So, even though Trump wants us to pay a little more, like we all know that the U.S. controls North America. So like Canada could have zero military and be fully subject. If Alberta separates, it's going to be subjugated to American military, just like Canada is out. Alberta doesn't really need a military to defend against what borders? Maybe let's keep the rats away, but so we don't need a military. Do we need a massive international diplomatic corps? I mean, I don't know, not that much.
I think we just need good negotiators around the oil, and that's it.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right, guys.
Yeah,
I'm going to jump in. I'm going to respect the time. I want to just give an applaud to Dave and Francis.
Thanks.
Thank you.